young person.
Your Worship, I neglected to mention in my role of Minister of Good News, I neglected to mention that Hayman Park, at our project there with Eke Panuku, won a National Institute of Landscape Architects Award in the place-based category. So significant achievement by them and a good result or a good outcome for our community in Manukau. Thank you.
Nicola.
Tēnā koe Mayor and Councillors, good morning. So I will try and keep this brief as Phil has mentioned. I just wanted to start briefly speaking to the long-term plan. So we all remember decision making on the 16th of May. Since then the team's been busy preparing the LTP document and working through the audit process towards a final document for adoption. So that will be discussed at a workshop or at the Budget Committee on the 19th of June ahead of final adoption scheduled for the 27th of June by the governing body. So that is all on track. In more good news, a couple of weeks ago we issued a 500 million Australian dollar bond, 5-year bond. That was the first time we had issued in Australia since 2016, so that represented a good step in diversifying our source of financing. Phil has briefly covered off the financial results and noted that the next item is a quarterly performance review from the team. Included in this item, you would have received the April year-to-date results yesterday. Just to note really that the trends are consistent with what you will hear about in the quarter, so I won't go into any detail on them here. And the last thing I wanted to cover, so at the last meeting there was a request regarding information on paying rates, and what was requested was some information on the current trends in payment, what measures Council takes to assist ratepayers and how we communicate to ratepayers about those measures. So you will have received a memo on that, but there's a few things I would just like to highlight. So the number of ratepayers who are struggling to meet their payments has increased slightly from last year. So we measure that by looking at which instalment is still overdue to what proportion. So based on the third rates instalment, that's the one due in February, there is 11% outstanding, and that's up slightly on 9.7% the year before. So we do see some change there. In terms of the support that we offer, the main thing we do are flexible direct debit payments, so people can choose to pay their rates weekly, monthly, however suits them best. We offer a rates rebate scheme for low-income households. There are rates postponement policies. Another thing that we do is remission of penalties, so if people are paying late and penalties start to get charged but they subsequently make payment arrangements, then we typically will remit those penalties for them. So aside from making regular direct debit payments, people can also contact us to make bespoke payment arrangements. And in terms of other assistance, the Council has also granted specific rates relief at certain times. So an example of this was the 100% remission that was granted to properties that were uninhabitable as a result of last year's severe weather events. In terms of our communications, so we're gearing up the communications towards the first rates notice that goes out at the beginning of August for the new rating year. In terms of all of our rates communications, they include a whole page of information on all of those payment options, and that includes the direct rates notices that we send out, ratepayer newsletter. The Council website has information, and there is media and social media activity to address that as well. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions at this stage? Pardon? Deputy Mayor.
Mayor, can I ask a question of the Chief Executive, please? And I don't know who's going to answer it, probably not you, but I just am interested how the fast track submission went to government and what questions they asked us.
Yes, I'll ask, well, Councillor Hills was there, so, and is indicating.
Kia ora. Yes, it went very well. We, Councillor Dalton and I, with support of Megan Tyler, spoke to our opposition to the bill in its current form, focused on the damage to the environment and the lack of focus on the environment, the lack of focus around Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the fact that it could be a backdoor to overriding prohibited activities, and the fact that it doesn't align with any of our plans, policies, plan changes. Quite a long list in 5 minutes, which is quite difficult. We were very clear about the council's concerns and what this means for the future of our environment. The questions we were asked, we weren't asked by any government MPs any questions. We were asked by one of the Labour MPs around apparently there's been a potential proposal to fast track the next harbour crossing, which I replied I wasn't sure what that would look like, considering there hasn't been a fully designed up proposal to fast track, and the concerns around the seabed, the community being completely ignored through that process, and what concerns that might come. That's my assumption. And we were asked by one of the Green Committee members around the Natural Built Environment Act and why we supported that, and I talked about how, because it had a focus on environment and worked with mana whenua and communities, etc. So that was about it. It was very fast, 10 minutes to try and fit what was a 160-page submission written by our able planning officers. So, yeah.
Megan has suggested she doesn't have anything to add, but she's available to you if you want to discuss any aspects of this offline.
Sorry, I did say that we did support fast-tracking infrastructure projects, but we just didn't want community, mana whenua and environment ignored. So there could be some good outcomes if there's significant change to the bill.
Thank you for that. Actually, within your report, which is a good report, covering a whole lot of various things that the government are doing, under the RM Bill 2, but that annoys me is that a direction on highly productive land to allow more productive activities, including housing. Housing is not a productive activity on land that grows vegetables, and there's been plenty of evidence that that's a very bad move. So let's hope that we can somehow or other oppose that. I mean, the last thing you want is our vegetables to disappear from Pukekohe to Kaitaia, which is what's happening already. Okay, Councillor Darby.
Thanks. Look, I just want to acknowledge Councillor Hills and Councillor Dalton for making that submission on the fast track legislation. I just want to check in. We oppose the bill. We oppose the fast tracking provisions as it applies to avoiding community Māori engagement, etc. So, what is our position if there was an application from a CCO or an entity that is 100% owned by us, e.g. the Port of Auckland, if it was to apply to use the fast track provisions, if the current Act endured and did not provide for community input? What would our position be, taking into account the feedback that we've given to the Select Committee? I am specifically referring to the proposed Bledisloe North Wharf extension, which the port company has said it intends to use the fast track provisions.
Through the chair, thank you for the question. Firstly, just as Councillor Hill said, and as you agreed, the submission does say that we do support the fast track, for infrastructure projects, but only in certain circumstances, and clearly there's opposition to this set of fast track provisions more generally. I am aware and understand that the Port of Auckland and Auckland Transport have suggested some infrastructure projects to fast track. They, I believe, have approached or advised the Minister or the Ministry to that effect. I think it would be a political conversation or a governance conversation that should those go through or there be any request for views, that at a governance level you could discuss whether or not you support that or not.
Thank you. All right, we're going to receive that report. I'll move it, and it's seconded by the Deputy Chair, Mayor. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, carried. Item 9 is the 9 months third quarter report. Karuna and others will come to the table, please. And I've got a number of things to say about this.
Morena, everyone, and thank you, Chair. Just want to make a note on the title of the quarterly report, which actually refers primarily to the cadence of reporting rather than its information specifically for the quarter. So the report contains a mixture of both quarter 3 and year-to-date information. We are looking at providing more information for the quarter in the coming months. However, acknowledging that that title raises ambiguity, and we'll amend it in future. So we've got a very brief presentation on results from Ross, John, Brian and I. We do have Ross online today, so I will hand over Ross to you.
Okay, thank you, Karuna. And my apologies for not being there in person, just a bit unwell this morning. I want to protect you all from my germs. If we go to the first slide, thanks. So just some of the projects that were completed within the course of the March quarter. There's some on the screen there. The first one, Stamwater 5 Stormwater Project in Grey Lynn. A bit of a boring photo of just a normal road, but what you don't see is what's going on under the ground. So all of the tunnel boring drives have been completed. There's 6 major shafts that have gone in place, all completed as of at the end of the quarter. So a significant project that will make quite a difference to flood risk in that part of Grey Lynn. The second one is showing some of the footpaths that are funded by the Rodney Local Board targeted rate. So some footpaths in Point Wells and Lee and Puhoi, areas that were basically had no footpaths, and then with the help of that local targeted rate, we've got some modern urban standard footpaths going into those places. The third one is the Watercare's water supply reservoir and Redoubt Road. So the third reservoir is now in place. It came into service on the 12th of March, added 45 million litres of storage to that complex. So that is kind of a significant addition to the amount of stored treated water Auckland has available. So that helps with resilience in the event of a disruption, natural disaster, drought. There's just that much more treated water in the system ready to go. If we go to the next slide, please. So group CapEx results for the quarter. So the quarter was another strong period of delivery. By the end of the quarter, it was 97% of the year-to-date budget delivered, up from 93% a year earlier. And as Nicola indicated, these trends have continued on in the recent months since the end of the quarter. So not everything, 97% is good, strong delivery. It's well over 2 billion of CapEx. It used to be we'd aim for 2 billion over a whole year. So hitting almost 2.2 billion over 9 months, pretty strong delivery. But not everything has been fully delivered. There's a few things that you get, like Eke Panuku had a land acquisition in Avondale behind schedule. You often get sort of those timing changes with land acquisitions. But across the group, really 2 kind of themes that have why things are a bit behind budget. One is the storm recovery projects. So what happened with the storm response, there's a lot of repair work that was put into the budget. There was quick action to put in short-term fixes, and then some quite chunky stuff to do the longer-term repairs. Those longer-term repairs have taken a little bit longer to get going in some places because they're complex. There's been a lot of work on design, a lot of work to inspect ground conditions, and also it's important that we take the time to get it right. We need to make sure that the longer-term fixes that are put in place are going to be climate resilient going forward, and including the events we've seen over the last 24 hours. Key reminder that climate change is going to be with us for a while. We need to make sure that the long-term fixes will stand up to what the weather might throw at us going forward. The other key thing is a matter of sort of cost and funding. Auckland Transport have had to do some more work on some business cases through several government approval processes. Water Care came to you, I think within that quarter, looking for some additional CapEx approval to spend a bit more, have had to work through it. So as there's been sort of cost challenges, funding challenges, what the group has had to do is reprioritise and rework the program. So that's quite appropriate that when those challenges arise, people work within envelopes, but it does cost time. So as we've had to kind of rework some of those big programs and juggle things around, it means delivery has slowed a little bit. If we move on to the next slide, in terms of the OPEX side of things, what we've seen is strong revenue result for the quarter across the group. So 59 million ahead of budget in terms of those controllable revenues. It's about a 3% favourable to budget. It's quite a strong result. So the biggest things within that is what occurs infrastructure growth charges as developers have completed projects. There's also been some extra grants come through for flood-related works. So some extra central government grants have come through and boosted revenue. We've seen building consents, licensing and permits, higher volumes come through. We've also seen some higher revenue come through the Port of Auckland. So that's just, to some extent, the start of bigger things to come in terms of that future outlook, improved future outlook for port revenue. Also within there's been increase in PT patronage, so a 9% lift in PT revenue compared to the prior year. We had expected some lift in this annual budget for this year, but things are going slightly ahead of budget in the PT space. On the cost side, it's just slightly favourable to budget, sort of less than 1%, but it's good news in terms of it's at or slightly below what we budgeted on the spend side. Within that, there's a couple of items where we had budgeted a bit more for things like insurance. We'd budgeted for quite a hefty insurance premium. As it turned out, we were a bit conservative, and the actual contracts we've got are a bit less than that. There's also been some professional services underspend, and that relates to things like the freshwater management, RMA reform, in part, where the government has delayed and reset things, and so some of the work we thought we'd have to get on with over this quarter hasn't occurred. Things will happen later. That's partly been offset by some additional storm-related and flood-related costs, minor repairs, works, etc. But overall, a pretty strong, favourable operating result. If we go to the next slide, around FTEs, so virtually unchanged over the quarter in terms of group FTEs. It's down 19 FTEs. Within that, you've seen a little bit of an uptick for Auckland Council, and you've seen reductions elsewhere. Auckland Transport and Tātaki in particular have come down because of some restructures that were taking place, and we're kind of starting to see that flow through into actual FTE numbers. Within Auckland Council, that's about filling some vacancies, and some of those are ones that are taking some time to come through, predominantly in the frontline services. That number, 23 million increase. Within that, there is a whole lot of licensing and compliance staff, 20 extra building consent people, and that does include 6 extra City Watch roles. So some pretty important frontline delivery work. Also, 8 extra Healthy Waters staff to help with storm response, recovery, resilience, etc. So modest results overall and down, but some very important roles being filled in terms of frontline delivery. So now I'll pass across to John Bishop to talk about the debt picture.
Thanks, Ross, and good morning all. So just from a debt point of view, net debt has decreased by 235 million since the beginning of the financial year. So now stands at 12.1 billion. That gives a debt to revenue of 236%, so well within our limit of 290%. And as we've previously been through, the main driver here is the proceeds from the 7% sell down of the airport shares, which has reduced debt. Without that sale, debt to revenue would be at around the 252%. If we look at the movements in net debt from the beginning of the financial year to the current position, so this shows the bars through each month. Essentially each month we borrow to fund a portion of our CapEx. That's the 2.17 billion that Ross mentioned. In some months, such as August, November and February, that's more than offset by the rates income that we receive. And also in September, you see the CapEx more than offset by the proceeds from the Auckland Airport sale. Just focus on that last bar there. So without the Auckland Airport sale, debt would be, or net debt would be around 12.9 billion rather than the 12.1 billion. We look at the forecast cost of borrowing. So that dark line there shows what we expected when we put together the annual plan for the current year. The purple line shows what we're currently expecting. So you see it being quite significantly higher than we forecast back at when this annual plan was put together, and that's on the back of sustained inflation and persistently high both short and long-term interest rates. Our credit ratings remain stable, AA from S&P and AA2 from Moody's. So now I'll pass on to Brian.
Right, hello over, Mayor and Councillors. Let me just flick to the next one. So just to highlight a few key projects over the past quarter. So obviously the College Hill sinkhole that appeared around May last year, that's been now repaired. It's an extensive repair job, 2.86 million. It took about 6 months to complete. And we now have a new stormwater pipe that runs from the intersection of Beaumont Street and Victoria Street West to England Street. Devonport Community Recycling Centre, that upgrade has been completed now, and that was reopened in Q3. So that's a new educational play centre, play space for children, new weighbridge and office, and improved stormwater management as well. And comprehensive renewal of the multi-purpose library, service centre, art centre, building budgeting services area at 49 Commercial Road, Helensville. That's now been completed and services have resumed as well. On capital investment, so another strong quarter, 106 million delivered in Q3. That takes the total capital delivered to 329 million for the 9 months to the end of March, and that continues to track better than at the same time last year. We are starting to experience some delays, and those are sort of typically due to consultation activities and some design, some complex design requiring further work. Capital investment technology is also slowed, and that's due to planning underway to meet fit for purpose technology and group shared services objectives. As Ross mentioned, revenue continues to run very strong, and so council parent actually forms the bulk of the sort of favourable revenue to budget. In the quarter to March, we delivered $106 million in revenue, about $5 million above budget, and that takes our total revenue for the 9 months to March to $47 million above budget. So resource and building consent volumes a big factor in that. They were better than expected. We had expected, just as a reminder, that volumes would fall by around 30% when we set the budget. So they have fallen year on year, just about 22%, but that's much better than what we had expected. Our performance has also improved, and so our discounts that we provide for late processing has also been reducing. Building inspections, CCC assurance, building warrant and fitness audits, licensing compliance, all of that continues to run ahead of budget. On the expenditure side, 375 million for the quarter, 12 million better than budget. So for the 9 months to end of March, we're about in line with budget. Staff costs remain below due to vacancies, and as Ross mentioned as well, so other expenditure running better, particularly in consultancy. Outsourced works and services where we're experiencing the pressure, and that's both from a pricing standpoint, just particularly where we've got consultancies that are tagged to labour costs, but also just supporting volumes, so increased better than expected volumes for building consents in particular. And then lastly, I think Nicola mentioned this in the previous monthly performance update, but we've achieved the $50 million savings target for FY24 as at the end of March. So over the course of Q3, a further 6.7 million in savings were realised through a combination of one-off and ongoing cost reductions. Examples of some of the ongoing savings were improved revenue from food licensing activity, further corporate property optimisation savings, and some favourable contract negotiations in that sort of tree planting service space. While this year's savings target has been achieved, just want to assure you we are continuing to progress activity on other savings initiatives with a focus particularly on enduring savings. I'll pass to Karina.
Thanks, Brian. So during Q3 24, performance measures were updated, where we met 14 and did not meet 10 of them. In terms of the favourable performance that you can see up there, stormwater services achieved all targets. With the customer satisfaction and regulatory services, the anecdotal feedback suggests that there was satisfaction with good communication in the overall process. The favourable trends in our customer and community facilities continue to improve, as you can see up there with participation at venues and facilities exceeding targets. In terms of where we did not meet targets, well, the results for website sessions and items checked out and active library members were higher than the same quarter last year and continuing the upward trend. And then in regulatory services, the statutory performance has improved for both building and resource consents. The improvement initiatives include balancing internal recruitment and managing contractor performance with projected future workloads. Just one thing to note around the noise control, the percentage of noise calls attended to which did not meet target. So if you're not sure what the targets are, it's within 30 minutes for urban and 45 for remote. The noise team has experienced some turnover. However, we've had some assistance from our contractor, ongoing recruitment, and some of the resources have been reorganised to mitigate this, which has helped. So that's the end of our presentation, and hand back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, I've got a couple of things, and there's two people wanting to talk about this. There's a lot in this, particularly if you go into the addenda. I wonder whether or not Williamson's committee is a better place to have a look at some of these things, because this is a big day and we're all here and things can slide past. But a couple of things that I noticed by piling through there is that, for instance, at the port, and our port observer is you, Mr. Darby, I believe, that they've got an increase in revenue but a reduction in profit, which is a disappointing thing. And I noticed that also the customer satisfaction targets for building consents and everything are achieved, but I'm still fielding a number of complaints relating to quite large developments where applicants are actually prepared to pay extra for more prompt responses to site visits. So perhaps Chief Executive or somebody, could you raise that there's a market out there to charge more. These people would pay more to get the people there when they want them. And so that's something to be thought of. Councillor Turner and then Councillor Ferry. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been struggling to get on Nexus, so if I've missed some of this, please. But I did we talked about insurance. Have we, we were still waiting on a payout on our claims. It was 130 million or something across the family group. Has that progressed yet? Have we had our payouts? That was the first question.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Look, we're still finalising aspects of the claim. We did have an interim payout of about 5 million quite a few months ago. So the quantum of the claim is still being finalised. It's probably looking at, in total now across the group, around 110 to 120 million. But we'd expect to get that paid out over the next several months, but probably will be into next financial year.
Thank you. And I saw on one of the slides there that those bar graphs of how our debt was moving around. There was 833 million in a dotted box, and then below it there was another dotted box saying 700 and something. Keep going back there. 720. Sorry, the difference between those two, that isn't reflective of what it costs to get that money into the accounts. You know, that didn't reflect the cost of sales and things, did it?
Through you, Chair, no, it didn't. So the gross proceeds from the airport sale were 836 million. Net proceeds are shown there of 833, so that's after costs. The difference between the 720 and the 833 million will be just things like our ongoing capital expenditure program.
Okay, thank you. Last question. Regulatory performance, and the Mayor did touch on this. Does that measure our, there's a cost to those site visits by inspectors, etc., which are, we're telling the industry, the construction industry, oh, you've got to wait 2 weeks, you've got to wait 3 weeks, you've got to, we can't get there, you've got to halt work while. Do we measure those sorts of physical performances?
I'll attempt to answer the question. So, are you, just to clarify, and thanks for the question, are you talking about the impact of delays to getting to inspections? Or?
Correct. The impacts of delays to construction inspections. Yeah.
I don't believe we measure the cost, presumably to applicants of those delays, but we can clarify.
No, sorry. All I was saying is it comes with a cost. Do we measure our turnaround time to those requests? The performance is just a dollar performance, is it? It's not a productive performance we're looking at.
The performance that we reported on was the revenue, particularly with the higher volumes of triple Cs that we issue. The length of time between when we receive a booking, for example, and actually getting to the actual inspection. We probably do measure, but I'll need to find out.
I think that what Councillor Turner is saying is that people outside measure it, and I get a lot of noise about it. I think we're missing out on business here. Airlines charge several prices for the same trip, depending on how late you book and everything, and there's an opportunity for us to do much the same. If the standard thing is you're 2 weeks before we get around to having a permit, but we'll pay, if someone wants to pay more, we'll be there tomorrow. We should be offering that, and I've asked the Chief Executive to talk to the leading building inspector to start thinking about that, because people will pay a premium to have it on a certain date, and it does cost if you don't have it on that date. Okay, good question. Thank you, Councillor Turner. And that is the end of those questions, and now I'm going... has got a late one.
Sorry, Mayor. Just on your comment before around coming to which committee, I'd prefer, if this is quite significant work and really good work, I'd prefer if it stayed here. Mainly, I'm not on the Revenue Expenditure Committee, but I've started having to turn up to those workshops because there's quite a lot of information that affects all of us.
I wasn't meaning it wouldn't come here. I was meaning if it goes there first, they can have a real stinking look at it, and then we can also see it as well. Okay.
The other comment or question, and it may be for Claudia, if the team up here don't know, the 80% support or whatever for our leisure facilities, could we please have that detail split between the council-owned and the contracted out? Because we've got information where the council-owned scores are far higher than many of the contracted out, and we're only getting the one figure here about satisfaction.
Thank you for the question. We will absolutely look into that, and where we can provide it, we will. So we just need to do that as a follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you. And just the last question, which I often ask on debt: if this year, if we had rated instead of borrowed for that new capital infrastructure, how much would our rates have had to have gone up?
So if you simplify, make the maths easier for me, if it was 2 billion of capex and 1% of rates is 25 million, so that's 80%, is it?
So if we didn't borrow for that new infrastructure, our rates would have had to go up about 80%, 80.
That sounds right, if my maths is correct, yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Anderson, and then we'll retreat these people and have a bit of a discussion if you need to.
Just a quick one. Sorry, it might be Claudia again. I'm following up Councillor Hills' question, and just to clarify that, customer satisfaction on facilities, is it recorded per facility? So can you go into, say, Westwave and get this customer satisfaction figure for that specific facility, or is it recorded differently?
So it's a very good question. So my understanding is actually it's quite a challenging thing for us to record consistently across all of our pools, but particularly some of our contractors might record some of their customer satisfaction slightly differently than we do. But what I can do is I can take that offline and we can have a look at how we portray customer satisfaction and see if we can give you some more advice on that, and see if we can come up with some good, useful comparables.
Okay, thank you, team. You can retire. And is there any debate? Otherwise, I'll move the motion that we receive the quarterly reports for the 9 months ending 31st of March, and it will be seconded by the Deputy Mayor. And I think there's no debate, so I'll put that motion. All those in favour of receiving that, please say aye. To the contrary, it's been carried. We'll go on to item 10. What are we about item 10? The Recovery Office itself. Update. I was out in West Auckland last week with the Minister of Cyclone Recovery, and there's some good work going on out there, clearing streams and that sort of thing. We all stood out in the rain there and watched logs being pulled out of a creek, and it was all good stuff there. So Matt, Fiona, Nick, off you go.
Good morning, Your Worship, councillors. I'm going to take the report as read, and I'll just pick some highlights from the executive summary on the first page that I thought I could bring to your attention, and then Fiona and Nick are going to talk in a teeny bit more detail about where the actual statistics and numbers are at now. We wrote the report a couple of weeks ago, and things are moving relatively quickly, so just an actual sort of up-to-date look at where the statistics and numbers are. You'll see in the executive summary that there is lots of proactive work taking place now in recovery, and more broadly as the recovery effort begins to more and more involve the business as usual parts of council rather than just operating in a rush as a group of people in a surge event. So you'll see making space for water now beginning to gain momentum rather than just the blue-green networks, but the whole spectrum of the Making Space for Water programme, community engagement and so forth. And the Storm Response Fund, we're pretty well through the Storm Response Fund for this year now, and that's making good progress right across council. Particular use of technology. We talk about technology in the report, and the Healthy Waters team using drones, for example, to really get into surveying the streams around Auckland and looking for hotspots that need attention. Part of the Making Space for Water programme is to engage one-on-one with homeowners. And I was particularly interested, and I thought you might be, by point number 5 in the executive summary, where out of 100 homes that the teams visited in a particular catchment, over 50% of them needed some remedial work and needed some follow-up in terms of understanding overland flow paths and blockages to overland flow paths and other sort of similar issues at those properties. So I thought 50% was quite an insightful number that you would be interested in. The recovery dashboard in the back of the report, you will see talks about the ever-increasing use of our navigator service. Another nearly 100 homeowners over the last month have reached out for help from navigators, so we're getting on now for having close to 1,000 homes and homeowners supported by the navigation service, so demand for that service continues to increase. I saw some, and you may have seen it too, some commentary in one of the advocacy groups' newsletters recently about the perception of the fairness of the valuations, the Category 3 home valuations that we've been doing. So I just wanted to talk to that briefly. We've valued now 270 properties, so 270 Cat 3 homeowners have had a valuation from us. And in 75% of those cases, the homeowners have accepted the valuation that has been done by the independent valuers that we engaged to do this work for us. What I take from that, obviously, is that the majority of homeowners are happy with the independent values and the independent valuations. Panu could tell me that in the background they know of 25 homeowners in that group who have had their own valuations done in parallel, but haven't presented them to us or given them to us. So again, my presumption is that their own valuations either matched ours or were potentially less in some cases. And the facts are that out of those 270 homes that we've done valuations on, or our independent valuations have been done for, only one of them is in dispute. Only one of those 270 homes is in a formal dispute with the Recovery Office. So if you're reading anywhere a perception that the valuations are unfair and the Recovery Office has a budget that it's working down from and it's trying to fit the valuations of the homes into some budget, that simply isn't the case, and the valuations are going well from my perspective.
I'd be worried if there was 100% initial acceptance. It's too high then.
Sure. I just wanted to pick up lastly on something that Phil said. He's right. We are, of course he's right. We are, we are well progressed now with our negotiation with the Crown CIP and CRU these days, Crown Infrastructure Partners and the Cyclone Recovery Unit, to move some money around in the buckets of the original agreement. And we hope in the next 2 or 3 weeks that something goes to Cabinet, and they, I think Phil said, ink the deal. Bit of work to be done yet in that negotiation, but 2 or 3 weeks away, we hope. I just now, as I said, was going to get Fiona and Nick just to talk to a teeny bit more detail.
Okay, so there's some steady progress on the Category 3 buyouts. You'll note in the general reporting there's quite a gap between the number of offers made and the signed offers, and largely that's due to homeowners getting their insurances and EQC claims resolved and just taking some time to decide, and some of the disputes as well, the timeline it takes for that, but otherwise it's running smoothly, getting some momentum and increasing month by month in the amount that we're managing to settle. We do have a number of disputes. It's sitting at around 7% of the, for categorisation disputes and special circumstances, that includes about 7% of the total numbers that have been categorised so far. And that's kind of remained steady over the last few months. And we're getting through them. Obviously, we've set up a scheme, and each of those disputes raises questions that take a little while to resolve, but once we get momentum with that, we'll get faster in the resolution. We have completed 3 of the deconstruction projects. We've got another few on site, and we've now got the contract documents. Procurement is about to send them out to the other panel members, so you'll start in the next couple of months seeing some movement in those deconstructions as well when the whole panel is online. We've factored into our forecasting what we believe the numbers will be for categorisation opt-ins by the end of September, and in some of the forecasting of the revised numbers that we expect with regards to the categories within that, and we're still working within that funding envelope at the moment. If you refer to the reporting, a thing to note, and as a risk that we will keep our eyes on in the next few months, is the average cost versus our budgeted cost when you net insurance from those and the homeowner's contribution and anything else. It's sitting around 100,000 above what we had budgeted for. We do think when we get more through the system and more data that will level out back towards our budget, but if that doesn't happen then we might need to do some reforecasting, and we're working on that at the moment to see what that looks like for worst case scenario. I think that's enough information, unless there are any questions on the facts and figures.
Here you go, Nick.
Okay, so there's been a lot of questions, understandably, around suburbs and local boards. This gives you the numbers of categorisations that to date in the local boards and the percentage of those categorisations against the numbers that have opted in. So you can see how we're performing with homeowners that have said we would like to be categorised versus how many we've got out the door in each of those areas. Now you'll note that there's some that are way more advanced and there are some that are not. That is generally the methodology of when those opt-ins came in, the timing that they opted in versus the first comes, first served kind of approach. Next. That's you.
Kia ora, and I'll jump in at the stage, Your Worship. Just one slide for me, I think. This slide, I'll take what we have in the document, and in attachment A is red, but I just really wanted to talk to two particular issues that appear on this slide. The first one is the lower bullet point there, is that the Storm Readiness Fund, the government funding, has obviously allowed us to get in and do a whole lot of extra maintenance and flood preparedness. That is working with, I think, somewhere around $6 million of similar funding within the 20 million for the Storm Response Fund. So that really is allowing us a really good operational budget to get in and do some work that we hadn't been funded for prior to this. It is a bit of an acceleration, I think, of what's coming down the track more broadly. The picture on the right there is obviously some pretty heavy-duty stream clearance, the sort of stuff that our maintenance contractors will be doing. Within that 2 million, roughly $1.4 million is set aside for that sort of work. Within there's also another 400,000 of funding set aside for more community involved sort of stream works. And the picture on the left, that's a picture you may have seen before. This is the Sunny Nook detention pond. That's a picture from the 27th of January. It's one of our early hotspot cameras. These are really invaluable in terms of our maintenance crew, knowing when things are blocked and need to be unblocked. As you'll see from that progression of photos, we had an event, the event ponded up, and it allows our maintenance crews to understand that they have to get in again. That is something that worked very well for us in a small number of locations, and so the thing I'd like to indicate in there is we really we were starting to get into on the ground rolling out of another 50 cameras of that nature, and they'll make a significant impact from an operational perspective in the first instance. Eventually 50 in the first instance at critical locations we've identified, and then another 50 coming down the track in due course. And that will be quite a big step in what is quite a big flood intelligence program.
How many metres high is that first picture of water?
Councillor Hill's asked how many metres high the water is in the third picture. That is roughly, I think, about 2.5 metres, Councillor.
Thank you.
That's the Sunny Nook detention pond.
Sunny Nook Park.
And that's all I had for you, Your Worship.
Thank you. That last picture was where you were watching the guys dragging those logs out of the creek last Friday. I have questions from Deputy Mayor, Councillor Sayers and Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, Your Worship, and thank you, team, for what you're doing. Look, I just want to ask a bit of a a general question about how you really feel you are going, because in the quarterly report in the item before, in item 9, it says there are ongoing delays in flood recovery projects across the group. But in your report, you say strong progress is being made with maintenance, repairs and storm preparedness. Are they both right?
Thanks, Councillor. I know the bit that you're referring to in the sentence that you're referring to in the quarterly report, and I think it was it Ross Tucker that I spoke to last. The words were the same in the previous report. He's referring, I believe, to projects that I wouldn't classify as part of the recovery, but he's best to speak to that if he's around online still somewhere, and then I can take the second part of your question.
Maybe, I don't know whether he's online, but maybe you can just have a chat to him and there we go.
Thanks for the question. I can provide a response. So the main delays were to capital projects, largely in sort of water care, actually predominantly. Repairs and maintenance of an operational nature, that's tracking very well. So Healthy Waters, Parks Community, that's all tracking. In fact, in some areas ahead of budget, they bring some work forward. Some of the delays associated with insurance is actually they can't get in there and make too many repairs if the loss adjusters then need to come back later to understand, well, what is the actual impact and you know, the cause of the damage. So some interim measures have been put in place until that can occur as well. So that's largely in the water care sort of capital project space.
As to the second part of your question, recovery can never go fast enough. I've said this before, so it would be remiss of me to sit here and simply tell you that stuff's going well, bearing in mind people that are still waiting for categorisations, can't live in their homes, etc. That said, we're getting through between 300 and 400 categorisations every month now, steadily, and I think that's a reflection of an enormous amount of work that's been done in a short amount of time, considering the policies themselves were only signed off in this very room at the end of last year.
Thanks, and well done.
Councillor Sayers.
Thank you. Sorry I'm not with you, just at home with the flu, but appreciate the opportunity to be online. My question's a little bit similar to the Deputy Mayor's in terms of a broad governance question. Just to pick up, I guess the word I'm looking for is perhaps some outliers that as governors, maybe we need to be made aware of, things that perhaps aren't falling into part of your normal process. For example, so it's just a question to really give the opportunity to alert us to anything else in addition to your report, guys. And there could be category 3 people out there, lost value on their homes, still in accommodation, going through the council process, but there's something unusual that's delaying, that family or that property owner moving forward in terms of our processes. So there may not be. If there are, you don't have to identify them, but just curious if there are any outliers that we need to be, just conscious of as a governance body.
Thanks, Councillor. I'm not sure I'd use the word outliers in so much as they're not individual properties that I'm about to talk about sort of in isolation on their own. We are in a situation at the moment where until we can get an appropriate degree of certainty with central government about this moving of money between buckets, so this moving of money between category 2C and category 3 that Phil and I have already talked about and is in the report here, until we can get ourselves to an appropriate level of certainty there are communities, particularly around blue-green networks, that are in a position right now where we are pausing with categorisation. We don't want to go out and categorise Fairview homes as category 2C, and then in only a limited number of weeks from now, when we get through these conversations with central government, change that categorisation fairly likely to category 3, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson, please.
Thank you. One question about valuation and another about sort of the categorisation and timings. So I'll do the last one first. There's a real distinction between slip-affected communities and flood-affected communities. So are they being treated equally in terms of timing for categorisation and settlement?
As I mentioned when the slide was up with the percentages, generally it's the first ones that opted in we're addressing, so the ones that have been the longest are getting their categories the soonest. But the only extension to that is where we looked at those coastal communities where there was the significant damage and they had group assessments, so that's why they're the higher number, because they've had a lump lot with that group assessment. We've been able to get through some of that quicker.
That's great, thank you so much. Just on valuations, and I'm not suggesting unfairness at all, I'm just getting reports of people that have bought at the top of the market and have then been given Cat 3 buyouts based on Jan 23 and ending up with negative equity, so they're kind of trapped in their home that's uninsurable and there's really nothing for these guys to do. So would you advocate a policy change or some sort of look into how we can address these hard cases?
Thanks, Councillor. I wouldn't talk to that in particular in terms of policy change. What I can tell you is next week we have a several-hour workshop in the Recovery Office where we're going to take a look at all the nuance now, particularly in Category 3. And what may come from that workshop might be some recommendations of change or tweaks or so on, but I can't speak to anything specific yet until we've done that work. But we're aware there is nuance in all of these categorisation policies that we could never have foreseen that we need to have a look at.
Thanks. I get there's no easy solutions, but if you can keep me updated on that particular thing, if there's information you can share. I've got a few families that I need to contact. Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Turner, please.
Thank you very much. Leading on from that and your comment about policy, you know, we're told regularly that we've got 17,000 kilometres of stream and waterway, which is basically the end haulage of all our stormwater. I accompanied the Mayor on his visit. We're taken down a public access because it's an easy to get to down a cycleway, and we're doing site-specific actions here, there, and we've only got $2 million to do it. You know, the majority of our streams have not got that access, and then I get feedback from communities who are trying to do their own work saying, well, you know, we've only been able to go so far, there's stuff further down, and also in one case councils refused to give us any more skips for our debris because they say we're clearing too much. So I see all this sort of disconnected activity when really we're looking for some overall policy. For instance, we've got SEAs across all our streams. Have we had a look at how that fits with what is being done physically? And because a lot of people are saying to me, well, am I allowed in? Aren't I allowed in? What can I do? What can't I do? So are we building policy which helps drive us to a different place of ability with our stormwater system?
Through you, Your Worship, I think the first point to make is that our current operational spending is being very focused across those 16,000 kilometres of streams. It is a budget which we are currently using within the urban area, and that is targeted around flood risk in particular. So that's a sort of how we're looking to use our current operational spending. In terms of wider policy decisions about where we do and don't get involved, we currently have a bylaw which states that you know your stream is something that you have to manage. We try and work really pragmatically with people through that process, understanding that there are a lot of things beyond people's control. But in terms of wider policy decisions about where we get involved, you know, potentially in 16,000 1,000 kilometres of streams. I think that's a discussion that we'll have over the next sort of while, because there are significant funding implications associated with that.
I'll talk to you offline because it gets complicated. Thank you. Yep.
Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor Ferry, please.
Thank you. I've got a few questions. The first is around whether we've had a response yet from central government around the letter on the temporary accommodation support from the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor. That deadline is coming up pretty fast in terms of June for those families. And I've got a number of constituents stuck in that situation. We've also written to them about the trusts aspect as well, I believe. So have we got any progress on that yet?
Through your worship, I have not seen a response yet, and I don't believe the Mayor's office has received a response yet, but we'll check that out.
Thank you. I understand that at least the Piha, Karikari and Anawhata group have raised it with the Minister directly, and there was some discussion about an order in council as a possibility, but I know we went down that path about a year ago, so I don't know if that's, but yeah, okay. Be good to get some answers on that, I think, given the time frame. Some of my other questions have been answered as we've worked through things, so sorry I'm taking a little while there. The compliance work, and this might not sit with your team, this might be more on Adrian and a Craig Hobbs thing, but where we know, for example, there's been a breach of a resource consent in the way that something's been built, or the way that you know, perhaps a fence is blocking an overland flow path or whatever. Where we know that then had an impact on a neighbouring property and caused damage, how strict are we being? How much sort of time frame and leeway are we giving people to fix those mistakes?
Through your worship, Councillor, I don't know the answer to that question. I think that is a question for Adrian and Craig Hobbs.
Oh, I'll take it up with them offline.
Good.
And then sort of my big sort of background worry at the moment is people not coming into the process by the deadline. And so what comms do we have in community engagement do we have planned around, I'm worried that people aren't necessarily thinking through the consequences, that we may have some, you know, the natural hazards plan change coming down the track that, you know, we're not really ready to entirely talk about yet because not all the work's been done, but giving people a heads up that, you know, if you don't come in by the end of September, there may still be consequences. This is not going to be a thing where if you don't come in, you're tickety-boo. Like there's potentially stuff coming down the track that people need to know so that they are making informed decisions about opting in, and I'm really worried we're not getting that right at the moment. So do we have plans in that space?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. We've already begun door knocking in some communities where we've got a reasonable degree of certainty about the homes that we believe should have opted in that haven't. Ahead of continuing to work through other communities to get that information together, we've begun wherever we can, as soon as we can. We're communicating in written form in different languages to homeowners that haven't opted in that we believe should have. I'm beginning to, the recovery office, are beginning to change our language now when communicating with groups that we don't think have opted in. I take your point and it's a good one. There's no hiding from this, to be blunt about it. The insurance industry aren't stupid, the banking industry aren't stupid, and they will be forming views as well on properties and homes and potential effects and potential future effects, just as we are. So I think that I'm beginning to be more blunt with homeowners in our messaging about there isn't any hiding from this. Opting in isn't a way to hide from the consequences that others will be able to see too, that they're going to have to deal with.
Yeah. And so are we, sorry.
Councillor, can I add some extra detail to that? we are obviously very concerned about properties that are potentially eligible for this buyout that are not taking advantage of it, and inevitably there's likely to be some, potentially many that won't. But I did want to point out that there's 40% of urban Auckland who are not eligible for a buyout and will get captured by whatever we risk information we do put on them.
Yeah, that's fair too. So are we looking at any media work, like direct media work on this? I appreciate the comms trying to get directly to people. One of the things I'm worried about is rental properties where, we might knock on the door, there might not be anyone living there at the moment, but also the person who lives there is not necessarily the person who would be opting in. I'm aware of a number of vacant properties in my ward which have been vacant for, over a year now. If we knock on the door, we're not going to find anyone. So what are we doing to sort of cut through that, I guess, and to also get that sort of general knowledge out there so that if, someone says to their mate at a barbecue, how's your flooding recovery going? And they're going, oh, I'm not worried about that. And they're like, you need to get into this by September, right? So what are we doing to sort of get that consciousness raised?
Thanks. I've just, in the last couple of days, signed off a media release which begins to take the tone that I've just described. But by all means, if you're interested, I can share with you more broadly offline the general media approach.
Great. One last question, which is around the dispute process or review process. I think, are they the same? Is dispute and review process the same thing, or is dispute different from a review? Because in the report we've got stuff about review, but then the language sometimes that we're using, and I've heard constituents use, is dispute. So I think they're the same, but maybe they're not.
Yes, they are the same. We like to try and call it a category review because we don't want to discourage homeowners. I don't want to be a pain. I don't want to raise a dispute.
Yeah, great, cool. That was I just wanted to clarify that before I go on to ask. So what, it's a bit of a difficult situation for navigators to offer support to people going through the review process, and I get that. So are there other avenues of support that people are able to access when they are going through the review process? Because I'm assuming the navigator service is not really available to them because they're kind of, navigators work for council, it's an awkward situation. Are we referring them to CABs? Are we linking them up with community groups that might offer them some support? Maybe you need to come back on that. Yeah, okay, cool. I'll send an email. Thank you. Oh, and just thank you very much for the dashboard. It's excellent, really helpful.
Councillor Hills, please.
Thank you, and thank you, Mayor. Thanks to the team. I've sent you an email, Matt and Nick, around two issues. One was a public meeting we had on Tuesday and just how we can improve the situation that was quite intense, shall we say, on Tuesday, making sure we have clear outcomes of what we want from a meeting, especially when it's sort of in the hundreds and we don't have a lot of additional information, I guess, for people who are very stressed, some are very angry, and I guess support for staff through that process. Secondly, just around the timing. So I guess for me, I only get what you guys provide us, but also lots of random requests from constituents, but obviously some good and some concerning, and then I sort that out. But I felt like from the meeting on Tuesday, and obviously you're probably turning up to a meeting because you're more upset than happy, but there was probably a lot more concern around timing, communication, goalposts continually changing more than I thought there was. So do you have maybe some clear answers on the resourcing? Is it a money thing? Is it, how could we expedite this? And I guess for Nick too, the making space for water side of things, especially in an area like Milford, when can we give any indication, like 1, 2, 3, 5 years, as opposed to just kind of like within a 10-year gap?
Through your worship. Councillor, if I could just step myself through that. Broadly speaking, there are a number of scenarios in which we could have delays. As Matt has indicated before, broadly around the region, we don't have those. In terms of the more than 2,000 properties being categorised for flooding, there are some individual situations where the decision around 2P or 3 is a problematic step, which is taking some time, and they exist. Broadly, the delays exist, as Matt indicated, within the blue-green networks, and specifically at the moment, because of our tranche 1 and 2 program, there are four catchments that applies to, one of which is the Milford area that you referred to. For those areas currently, we're waiting on the response to, I think, the June Cabinet paper that's going up. And so it's unfortunate because those 4 communities involved have large numbers of risk to life properties. Obviously, we're trying to get through our conversations with the government, but that is problematic for those communities. And realistically, at this stage, that's not going to resolve until somewhere around the end of June at the earliest. That's our understanding.
Thank you.
Do you just have any comment on future meetings, I guess, and how we can... There's always going to be a limitation of what staff can know, but I guess for me, I was happy to step in, but I know that some elected members maybe wouldn't have helped. You know, I did feel it was a bit tough for the staff there.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. You're right. The feedback I've had is that we could have done better. We, to some degree, were caught between in the situation that Nick has just described, where at the heart of the solutions in Milford is 2C versus Category 3, and that kind of pause, for want of a better word, whilst we get to a point where we can make that decision. It's ironic, but we're pausing to try and go faster for that community. Category 3 solutions are going to be considerably quicker and provide certainty of outcome for communities and homeowners a lot better than some of these long-term Category 2C. So ironically, whilst we're pausing, it is to try and go more quickly, ultimately.
We don't need to, you know, I sort of would like a review of the timing, but if you're saying that's more just where we're at, I mean, it does seem, is there a way to get letters out to all those people around some clarity soon? Because there was just so much, got a letter saying April, got a letter saying June, September, you know, people have been out of their house for 18 months and they know it'll take a long time, but just a certainty at all. Or like a re-communication with them to allay fears.
Yeah, but I think I probably need to take some guidance from Phil offline on at what point it's appropriate to communicate widely with the community about this 2C versus Category 3 outcome, possibility, potential, and what it means. I'm cautious to do that without, you know, some certainty from central government, but Phil, I can work with Phil on that and see if something could be done.
So some of that was unfortunately or fortunately communicated at that meeting. There was media there, so I guess that is already out there and needs to be, whatever we know needs to be formalised because people are very confused. Some were happy with that, but yeah.
Thank you for that. Councillor Furley, please.
Kia ora, I think it's probably a good time for me to chime in because that's the issue, the very issue in Māngere is the 2C versus Cat 3 situation that they're caught in. But firstly, thanks for coming out, Nick and the team, to the meeting that we had last month in the Māngere Memorial Hall. We had a good turnout and I know that the team answered those questions really well, and there were a lot of difficult questions from families who are still traumatised by what happened and many who are still not back in their homes. And it's that uncertainty that's the issue, that's the problem for our community. So you can guess my question then is, you know, have we heard back, do we know anything about, you know, and I'm mindful that the Māngere is one of the stronger plans that we've presented to the Crown, Have we heard anything back? Do we have an update? Do we know when we might hear back? Kia ora.
Through your worship, councillor, we don't, unfortunately. Our expectation is once again sort of by end of June to have a much better understanding of that. But unfortunately, I can't give you any more detail right here.
Kia ora. Thank you.
Councillor Walker, please.
Yeah, just very quickly, while I understand the issues that you're confronting around the severely affected properties, we've got quite a lot of areas around Auckland. I mean, St Heliers recently, where there was some severe flooding that impacted on people. Other locations that I'm familiar with in the Albany ward, for example, that really demand attention. I'd pick up on what Councillor Turner raised around managing streams and the like, which are actively silting up and generating problems. And what I'm mindful of is that as much and all as it might be said that it's not possible to do something in terms of a really severe event, I mean 1 in 100 years or the like, what we're seeing are these other events that are still capable of doing substantial damage, and we're really not addressing the overland flow paths and a whole variety of things that we could be doing to significantly reduce the damage to households and businesses that I would suggest on a annual basis will be approaching many, many millions of dollars. And I don't doubt that insurance companies are concerned around that. So what are we doing there? Because I haven't had much of a response to things that I've brought to the attention of Healthy Waters, for example. And just as an aside, we had an instance where a local golf course up at Whangapraoa, which is privately owned, was severely damaged, essentially through runoff from the council roading network that runs into their property. And they're really desperate for assistance, and this issue has been raised before. It's really unfair that individuals increasingly and private properties are bearing the brunt of council stormwater issues. By comparison, council golf courses often receive a substantial amount of expenditure around stormwater. So that's just an example that I'm raising. Thanks.
Apologies, did that require, is it a question or a statement?
Just be nice just to have a brief response in terms of how we're addressing that. I appreciate.
Happy to respond. As I alluded to with Councillor Turner, we're doing our best to spread our resources appropriately according to risk. So in terms of what are we doing to manage that through, the answers to that are in two areas, what we're calling critical streams and critical assets, so critical inlets and outlets. So the first one is really around the sort of places where you've seen the pictures of removal of trees and that sort of thing, and that is firstly an identification within our 16,000 kilometres of streams of where we need to be working. We're not looking to get in and spend money if it's not going to reduce flood risk. So that's an operational thing that we're working our way through so that we maintain that list of critical streams and we have a kind of clear understanding between ourselves and our community where we get involved. And that's something we'll be working through with yourselves and with local boards in upcoming sort of months to year. The other point in particular is around those critical inlets and outlets. You've seen the pictures before around the sort of hotspot cameras, and obviously that's only part of the deal. We have to work in with an operational response to that. So right at the moment, in terms of, we feel our biggest risk to properties is around blockage. You know, a 100-year event is always going to be mammoth, but if we get blockage in the wrong place, we can turn a 10-year event into the equivalent of a 100-year event. So I think it's fair to say our approach right now is to deal with those key blockage risks at key locations we've identified.
Thank you very much for that. Deputy Mayor Simpson and then Councillor Bartley. You are all asking stuff that we've heard plenty of times before, I've got to say, and this is actually an update. And we've got quite a complicated debate about what we're going to do about this coming up next. So write down your questions, please, and look at them and say, how many times have you heard these before? Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm not sure whether this is to you, Matt, or probably more to you, Phil. Being conscious of the future flooding risk for Auckland, I was told that our Auckland rain radar was out of action recently. Is that correct? And what kind of risk is that for us?
Yeah, I'll take that. Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I'm advised that the rain radar for Auckland was out of action. I can't be precise as to for how many days, but it was over a period when a weather system came through, I want to say 10 days ago. I think just to relate this to the recovery discussion, there was provision in the Storm Response Fund for Intel early warning, if you like, systems, and the fact that Auckland only has one rain radar facility in the north and nothing in the south, with a region that's 140 kilometres long, isn't, in my view, prudent. So we've got a good relationship with Met Service. There's a dialogue happening with them, and there is provision in that Storm Response Fund for those systems. So probably the thing out of this to make you aware of is that we're having discussions with them about installing a second rain radar for the Auckland region, and I would anticipate making a financial contribution out of that fund under delegation. So I think it's prudent. We need the redundancy in that system and to better cover the region. So I think that's the relevance of that.
Good question, good response. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you. Thank you, Healthy Waters, for your work in coming out to Sylvia Park School that experienced some flooding. Was it the 10 days ago flooding event, rain event? Really appreciate that. And also you, Nick, coming out to Ellerslie, where we normally have cars floating when there's a heavy rain event. So I appreciate Healthy Waters' work. My question is to Matt. Once we finish up with Cyclone Gabriel and the anniversary day floods issues, what are we prepared for the next lot of Cyclone Gabriels that are going to come through for the other parts of Auckland, now that some of our other parts are starting to flood pretty bad? Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor. We're just beginning to put the structure and the framework around two documents, I'll call them. One is recovery lessons learned. So what did we learn from this recovery? Both good and bad, because some stuff's gone well, some stuff's obviously not gone so well. And a transition plan, the transition plan to transition what recovery does at the appropriate time back into council business as usual. Both of those things are interconnected and heavily interrelated, and in transition, what we want to do when we put parts of recovery back into BAU, let's take data as an example. So we've already begun to transition the collection and management of data in the recovery office, thousands and thousands of pieces of data around homeowners back into council's BAU. Rather than just transition some people and some systems, we're also building back in as best we can the lessons that we've learned. And next time something like this happens, when do we need data? What does that data look like? How do we keep it secure, and so on and so forth? So yes, the two big pieces of work, the transition plan and the lessons learned for next time.
That's everybody. Right, well, I'm going to move that we receive your report, and it will be seconded by the Deputy Mayor. And we've got a discussion from Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Mayor. Just briefly, and look, some of it is what we've heard before, Mayor, but, when you stand at a public meeting for 3 hours on a Tuesday having to answer many, many questions from very upset community about timelines and discrepancies and, very older people in our community have been out of their homes for 18 months. It's important for us to get as much new information as possible to update our community. I was at another cluster of residents last night who are surrounding the slip on a cliff. Some of them are living it, some have not opted in, and I encourage them to opt in case their homes are at risk. There is a lot of massive work to do, and I've heard, thankfully, today from Matt that we are doing all we can. I think a lot of people don't realise that the people doing the categorisation are contractors. We're contracting a whole bunch of other companies to do this work, and they're overwhelmed too. So I hope it will speed up. I'm glad that your conversations with the Minister have been good around getting those 2C properties in, but once again, that's going to add more uncertainty in the intermediary time. And that is a big change. I don't think, for maybe councillors who don't have this in their ward, the change will be significant, but I think the conversation in the next item will cover some of that. But I just want to thank everyone for the work, but I think acknowledge again after 18 months that a lot of our community are very confused and upset still, and we just need to keep getting ahead of it to try and give people certainty, even if it means they're living in an uncertain world for some time. They just need to know when that uncertainty might end. Thank you.
Fair enough. And there'll be more uncertain if we have another one of these, because we won't be raising $700 million out of the government and ourselves either for the next lot, so they should think about that. Okay, all those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Thanks very much for that Recovery Office update. Now we've got an interim guidance